On Keeping Score number 9, I spoke with the one and only Steve Flink. He's a writer for TennisChannel.com and the author of this book, The Greatest Tennis Matches of All Time. We spoke about the riveting 2017 Australian Open final. Here's our full discussion. Chris Fowler called this the greatest major he's ever covered. Now you've been, you've obviously covered many majors. Would you agree with that statement? Could that have been the best you've ever covered?
That's so difficult to say. I mean, you rank it up there just for the mere fact that look at the two final round matchups that we had with the Williams sisters, who had first played in a Grand Slam final against each other back in 2001, and then to have Nadal and Federer. The last thing we expected was for them to play their 9th Grand Slam final, and yet they did, very much against the odds, with Federer being seeded 17th and Nadal 9th. So from that standpoint, yes, and there were some spectacular matches along the way. We had the Federer 5-setter with Nishikori, and interesting semifinal with Federer and Wawrinka. How I would rank it up there, I'm really not certain that I would put it at the very top. There have been some remarkable U.S. Opens that I've seen with, all-star cast in the semifinals and Sampras and Agassi in the finals. And I think they're majors that in 92 Open with a series of remarkable, astounding triumphs from Stefan Edberg from a breakdown in the 5th set. I could cite many, but I don't think I would put many above it either, given what we got in the end. And I enjoyed it immensely, was there for all 2 weeks, and it was a lot of fun.
What was so amazing to me is when I looked back at it, I thought, wow, you know what? I've been a Roger Federer believer this whole time. I was someone who, usually when people said, okay, he's done, he's never going to win a major, I was the first one to say, no, I don't believe that to be the case. Now, even I lost hope eventually, especially after the U.S. Open when he lost to Cilic in that semifinal in straight sets, where all he would have had to do was beat Cilic and Nishikori. And he would have captured that U.S. Open crown. But this Australian Open...
2014, that was a golden opportunity lost. And
right.
I think that one of the problems was that he went on the court with Djokovic having already lost to Nishikori. I think it would have been much better for him to play, to not know that result, to have played the first match on that semifinal day.
Yeah.
And just worried about that, because I'm sure he was well aware of the circumstances and hoping that he could play, come back strong from a 5-setter against Monfils, but he wasn't able to do it. You're right. There were so many near misses, and you look at those two finals in a row, 14 and 15 against Djokovic at Wimbledon. You cited the latter earlier, and then you had the 2015 Open. So there were 3 major finals in those 2 years, all of them that he lost to Djokovic. I really thought it was probably not going to happen myself, and I certainly would have put very long odds on him winning this tournament, given that it's almost impossible to do when you've been gone that long from tough tournament play, when you're just not match tough, when a lot of people thought he looked thinner through the legs and, very fit, but he had injury problems. As you know, at the end, there were groin issues, and saw the trainer after the 4th set of both the semifinals and the final, and looked a little wobbly early in that 5th set against Nadal when he went down 3-1. So I would never have believed he could do it in this fashion, and that's what makes sports so spectacular, is you never really know what's going to happen. Plus, he's obviously one of the great champions of all time. In my view, the greatest player of all time.
Right, you had the long layoff, and you had the fact that he was the 17th seed, and you looked at his draw, and you're like, oh my God. The thing that we were really concerned about,
now,
Federer...
I would interject that, interestingly enough, Gill, the last number 17 seed to come through at a major was Pete Sampras in 2002. Now, it was different. Sampras had lost to the lucky loser George Bassel at Wimbledon in a shocking second-round upset, and had played poorly over the summer, and nobody liked his chances coming into the Open, and he ended up winning it over Andre Agassi in the finals. It proved to be the last match he ever played. So that's an interesting parallel there, that he, too, was a number 17 seed. But we have to keep in mind, Sampras's was due to having not had good results that year, and he knew it. He just wasn't really fully motivated until he got to the Open. Federer's ranking dropped primarily because of being gone for the whole second half of last year, so that ranking was, I think, a bit misleading. He really wasn't the 17th. It shouldn't have been. If you did an honest projection, you would have seeded him much higher at this Australian Open.
Right. I was just looking at it that one of the main concerns we had was that when Roger Federer played long 5-set matches, maybe he could get through the first one, but then, even after a day off, the next match, we found that he was in trouble. And we alluded to that U.S. Open semifinal against Cilic, where he actually played a 5-setter with Monfils before that match. And after that match, a lot of people were pointing to the fact that maybe he was tired. And then, of course, you saw Djokovic kind of wear him down late in those in a lot of their meetings. So what I thought
he did, and 5-setters have been a problem for him. This was just a series of very kind of bizarre 5-setters in a way. Nishikori in the round of 16 against Roger had he had a problem with his legs back, and he had the trainer out on the court early in the 5th set, and he really sort of faded away in the 5th. And Stan Wawrinka, who had a knee issue himself and left the court to have it treated during that semifinal with Roger, he had some golden opportunities to break at 1 and 2 all in that 5th set, and he squandered them, and then suddenly played a very poor game on his serve, and Federer kind of ran away with that 5th set. And then the most remarkable of all, of course, was the climb back from 1-3 to win 5 straight games against Nadal. I mean, how improbable is that? And he made some. That was some of his best shot making of the match off the backhand side. Was down the stretch those last 5 games. I think he just found. I think he was playing on adrenaline because he looked very weary to me early in the 5th when Nadal went up the break, and somehow there he found the magic in the end. And it was. I think he'll look back on this one as maybe the most satisfying personal victory of his career. He'll cite the French Open in '09 as a very big win because he knew that was probably going to be his one and only opportunity to win the French, with Nadal having gone out against Robin Soderling, opening the door. But this one, to beat Nadal in a major final at this stage of his career, having not beaten Nadal in a major final since 2007 Wimbledon, was astonishing.
Yeah, and you actually just mentioned both, but in terms of Roger's game, tell me if you agree with this. I thought the 2 biggest changes between the way Roger was playing in this Australian Open and what we had seen in the years prior when he wasn't able to capture that 18th major was, one, I thought he was flattening out his backhand and hitting his backhand as well as I've ever seen him hit it, particularly his backhand cross court. And then the other one was the legs. He was actually the 4th player in history. The other one was
what? Sorry, I didn't hear your second one.
Oh, the other one would just be his legs. I believe he was like the 4th, only the 4th player in probably Open era history to not only beat 4 top 10 seeds, but win the title while playing 3 5-setters.
Yeah, I know that. That's something that he'll be very proud of. I agree that technically the backhand was probably better than ever. I will add, though, that Nadal made what I think for him was a catastrophic tactical error, in that he tried to just basically slug it out with him, his cross-court forehand against Roger's backhand, forgetting that the biggest problem he has always presented to Roger is with the high, heavy topspin. Not worrying so much about the pace, but the whirlwind topspin that bounds up high above Roger's shoulder. He was letting Roger hit a lot of waist-high backhands. He was playing right into his hitting zone strength. And I have never seen Nadal make that kind of a mental error, you could call it, because he usually is one of the best thinkers on a tennis court you're ever going to see. And he went against the grain of what is best in his game against Federer and what has always confounded Federer. And Roger has never really found a solution to that shot. And it's understandable because two-handers have a little more strength up high. And Rafa simply didn't make Roger hit enough high backhands. And therefore, I think in the end, that's what cost him the match. Only in the second set of that final did he go with the heavy topspin. And he did manage to break Federer's backhand down in that set. But otherwise, he was playing too many relatively flat forehands cross-court. And Roger just loved that pattern of play.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So that's not something I noticed. Do you think that Rafa almost over-adjusted? Because I think last year, if you looked at the numbers, the average RPM on his forehand, and now we're getting real technical, was actually, if you looked at his career, I believe among one of the highest, right? And Rafa always is known for that heavy topspin forehand, but I didn't think he was being he wasn't playing aggressive tennis with his forehand very well last year, and I thought that in this year's Australian Open that actually looked better. but are you saying that maybe Nadal over-adjusted and he started to
Oh,
try
I
to
think
penetrate
so.
through the
I
court?
think so. I don't think it did look better, but I disagree with you on that
Uh-huh.
respectfully because he missed more forehands. The reliability of that forehand, he's always been able to measure it so beautifully,
Right.
whether he's flattening it out or going with a heavy top, and he can go for 27 minutes without missing one. And he missed a lot starting with the Monfils match in this tournament, and I found it was just a little bit off, which I would have thought would have been all the more reason to go with the heavy topspin, which would have been safer
Uh-huh.
than the relatively flat one. I was disappointed in the quality of his forehand. You have to remember though, Nadal was actually. It's one thing to come back from 5 hours and 14 minutes and 5 sets against Verdasco in 2009 and then beat Federer in the 5-set final. But now he's doing it at the age of 30, and I really felt he was just maybe a quarter to a third of a step slow. Not really slow, but not up to his normal standards of court coverage, and Roger exploited that to the hilt. And I think it balanced things out because Federer had come off a 5-setter, but he had 2 days off. Nadal had only 1 day off.
Yep.
And it's still to Federer's credit that he could be as fresh as he was down the stretch, but I don't think Nadal was. And I don't think he wanted to talk about it much in the press conference, but you could see it was weighing on his mind, and he was disappointed that physically he didn't have just a little bit more to offer that day.
Would you say he's the favorite, the early odds-on favorite to win the French?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, it's funny. A lot of people thought, okay, back in the finals, that's a step. Good for him. I think it's a devastating defeat for him.
Wow.
Not that he doesn't have the utmost respect for Roger Federer, but he expects to beat him in these big finals, and the record shows that he can do that. And seemingly it was the ideal opponent for him. Didn't have to play Djokovic in the semis as he would have. It wasn't a tough season #1 player in the world in Andy Murray, who might have been pretty tough for him had he gotten through. It seemed to me to be just the right set of circumstances. I think this loss will linger, and we're going to have to see how Nadal looks on the clay, and whether he's beating the likes of Dimitrov. You have to remember he was 3-4, 15-40 down in the 5th against Dimitrov, and pulled out some of the best shot making he could display from that point on, starting with a back-end winner down the line, and then he came to the net twice, put away a couple of volleys, and came all the way back to win 6-4 in the 5th. But he was on the brink. I think Dimitrov could present problems to him. I think Dominic Thiem. There are a lot of guys, even on the clay, who could be difficult for Rafa. So I don't make him that clear a favorite until I see what he does in Monte Carlo and Rome and the other clay court events. If he can do as well as he did last year, and then come into Roland Garros and not be injured when he had to leave with a wrist injury last year, then maybe so. I certainly don't make Federer. I don't think Federer is going to put much stock into that when he's going to go after Wimbledon much harder. But I think there are other guys on the clay, including Murray, and obviously including Djokovic as the defending champion, provided he can get his form back, who at this stage, I certainly would put Djokovic at this stage, assuming I'm expecting him to sort of bounce back emphatically here. And if he does, I would still make him the favorite to defend.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. I want to talk about some of those young guys who you mentioned a little bit later. But you mentioned that this is a really a loss that could linger for Nadal, and it would certainly appear so if you look at the race to will Nadal catch Roger Federer in major titles. What do you think this match meant for Federer and Nadal's legacy and the race that they sort of have to possibly be considered the greatest player of all time?
Oh, I think it was enormously consequential, because if Nadal wins, he would be 2 majors behind Federer. It would be 17-15, and he would have been roaring into the French, thinking about that with a chance to maybe close the gap to 1, and it would have been very exciting for him, and his confidence would have been reestablished. Instead, I think it's very jarring, and I think now Federer has the 4 major edge at 18-14, and it's inconceivable to me that Nadal can ever make that gap up now. I think he's a fairly old 30. Federer may be a young 35, as he demonstrated in Australia, but I think that Rafa would be hard-pressed to win. If he won 2 more, he'd be doing extremely well. So yeah. I think that, and by the way, I think Nadal didn't want to talk about that. I think he's one of the most candid guys out there in press conferences. The one thing I don't think he was entirely candid about was he thinking about this at all heading into that match or during that match. I don't see how he couldn't have thought about it, because it was maybe the most important match was for both of them in their entire careers in the sense of what it meant historically. I mean, obviously, some of that Wimbledon final epic of '08, they played matches that you could say were bigger in other respects, but this one carried a more on the historical ladder. This one meant more, and they both knew it. And Federer downplayed that as well and said he was just looking for another. Good for him. I think maybe he put it out of his mind well, but you can bet that he thought about it afterwards in terms of what it's going to mean to him going forward and distancing himself from Nadal, and now he's 6 ahead of Djokovic. So I think he's going to be safe in terms of either one of those guys having any kind of reasonable chance to catch him in majors.
Yeah, it turned into such a meaningful opportunity for both of those players, and it was great to just get buzz. Have you ever felt that kind of, well, not ever, but I think here in the States, especially for a match that was going to be played at 3 a.m., the buzz for that match was about as high as I've ever felt, which I was glad
I'm sure. I think it was over there, too. So unexpected. But of course, the door was open. We knew it. Once, Djokovic losing to Denis Istomin in the second round, Murray going down to Misha Zverev in the fourth round, and that's what really sort of cleared the way for both of them. I'm not sure either one. I mean, for instance, Federer, you think about the destiny of this. If he'd had to play Murray after having gone 5 with Nishikori at that stage of the tournament, I don't think, at least there's daylight. When you play Stan Wawrinka 5 sets in the semis, you only have one more match to go, and you can throw yourself into it, as he said he would. He said he didn't care if he couldn't walk for 6 months. He was going to leave everything out on the court, which he absolutely demonstrated in that monumental effort against Nadal. But had he gone up against Murray in the quarters after 5 fairly physical sets against Nishikori, I don't think his chances would have been very good at all, because I think Andy would have turned that into an exhausting kind of a skirmish, and there would have been long rallies. He would have been defending. It would have been the most punishing physical match Federer could play outside of Nadal or Djokovic, but right up there. And I don't think at the quarterfinal stage he would have envisioned himself being able to survive that. I think things changed a lot when Murray lost. Federer breezed by Zverev, and then he went on to play that semi with Wawrinka, but he'd had a chance to sort of be revitalized as a result.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, Murray losing that match to the serve volleyer Misha Zverev kind of really opened up the draw. On the other side, though,
he didn't adjust well. By the way, he didn't pass
to the serve
well.
volley.
Zverev was lefty serve and volleyer, and he volleyed brilliantly. But I think that Andy didn't. He should have at a certain point. We all kept expecting him to start passing much better off his two-hander, and he never was able to find the range with that, and that hurt him.
And the conditions, real quick, were those as
I think that was overrated, by the way.
Overrated.
I don't know why. To me, especially at night, by the way, I didn't see it. I mean, for the Federer Nadal or Federer Wawrinka, most of these big matches down the stretch at night, it's always cooler at night. It slows things down some. It was quicker than other years, for sure, but I don't think it was lightning fast. And I think for some reason that talk, everybody can start talking about it, and suddenly it becomes it enters everybody's consciousness. But watching sitting at courtside, especially at night, I didn't think it was as significant as it was being portrayed.
Right. So for Murray, I don't think it is overly concerning, that loss. I think it was a bad day. But Djokovic, you start to look at what Djokovic has done recently, particularly the last 4 or 5 months, and there's definitely reason to be concerned for Novak Djokovic. It has been a small collapse. If you looked at the rankings come U.S. Open time last year, you would have saw a huge point deficit between Djokovic and Murray. And now, of course, Murray is the world number 1, and Djokovic is in a major slump. What has happened to Novak Djokovic?
Well, yes, I agree, but there have been some bright spots amidst it all, despite not really ever getting in any kind of rhythm at the U.S. Open and having guys defaulting and retiring against him, and Monfils playing a bizarre semifinal against him. He still made it to the finals and was very competitive against Wawrinka. In some ways, a bit unlucky to lose it, squandered chances after winning the first set in the second and third. And then, he started to play well in London in the year-end championships after a bad fall, and then he just was not himself at all against Murray in the final. And then he looked good in Doha, by the way, before the Australian Open. It was one of the best matches he'd played in months to beat Murray in the finals of Doha And I thought he'd sort of pulled it all together there. So, yeah, there have been ups and downs, and certainly shocking that he could lose to Istomin, and no real justification for it. He was listless. He didn't look like he could rouse himself. He looked like he was trying too hard to be composed. He's much better off to vent. If you recall in the 2015 Wimbledon final, the second of those two finals with Federer, he won the first set, and then he had 7 set points in the second set, and 6 of them in the tiebreak, and it got away from him. Suddenly it's 1-set all. He was raging at the tiebreak, infuriated, just looking at his corner. You thought he was coming unhinged almost, and yet the last 2 sets completely composed again and won it rather comfortably. He's a guy that needs to express himself at certain times. He didn't do that against Istomin, and I think maybe that was a mistake on his part to not allow himself to let some of that out. But I agree. He's struggled, but I expect that over time here, when we get to Indian Wells and Miami and the clay court circuit, that he will reestablish himself again. I mean, maybe not as dominant as certainly not as dominant as he was in 15 and 16 in that stretch, but I think we'll see him play much better, so that by the time of the French, my guess is that he's going to be getting close to where he was at this stage a year ago.
Okay, and you're not concerned about his coaching change or any of that?
Yeah, a little bit. I am. I think Marian Vida, though, has been with him forever, and Vida can do the job. It might be wise to find somebody else to replace Becker, but it's got to be just the right guy. It's got to be somebody of stature. He can't just put anybody in that role. But I think there may be things going on in his private life. You hear a lot of talk there, and that could be also weighing on his mind. But I just think he knows this is a crucial stage of his career, and I think he's going to recover his winning ways. That's my guess, at least.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, he certainly should. But we'll see what happens. I want to kind of move out of the big four now and talk a little about the larger landscape of tennis. I think that you would agree with me that 2016 was a bit disappointing for maybe not so much Raonic, who had a good resurgence at the end of the year, and of course Wawrinka captured the U.S. Open title. But we were worried that Djokovic was going to have very little competition with if the young guys like a Dimitrov who's kind of struggled. If these guys didn't step up and really challenge Novak Djokovic, do you think that these guys are getting closer? Will Raonic? I mean, Raonic is still looking for his first major, and it's still very early. And then you got Dimitrov. Alexander Zverev, Dominic Thiem, Nick Kyrgios. What are your thoughts?
Now you're getting
about
to the
that?
guys that I'm much more encouraged about. I'm very worried about Raonic.
Okay.
He had the same kind of a injury here that he had against Andy Murray when he lost in 5 sets a year ago, and he really didn't give a very good account of himself against Nadal in the quarters, and he lost in straight sets, had a lot of chances in the second set, but it just was not. It's very worrisome. He had to leave the court again. There's always something physically wrong with him. There's always something going on with Nishikori, as we saw in his loss to Federer. And so I'm not terribly encouraged about Raonic. And maybe he can pull off a major somewhere along the line. It even could be Wimbledon this year. But everything has to fall into place physically. He's got to stay healthy. But the other guys, I feel like Zverev, I think, is a sure thing. I think he's just so gifted. And I think if he hadn't cramped against Nadal at 2-2 in the 5th set in Australia, he might have won that match. Once he cramped, I think Nadal knew he had him, and that's to Nadal's credit that he put him in that position where the German could be feeling it like that in his legs. But I think I'm very encouraged about him. Thiem tends to be hanging a little bit too far behind the baseline at times, but he's such a great competitor, and I think he'll come round. He played too much last year, and he'll come round. And Dimitrov, I'm extremely encouraged about him. The way he started this year off, winning Brisbane all the way to the semis of the Australian, theoretically 5 points away from beating Rafael Nadal when he had Nadal serving at 3-4, 15-40 in that 5th set. And it took some spectacular play and some enormous willpower for Nadal to pull that match out. And Dimitrov looked fresh as could be, even right down to the very end when he pushed Nadal hard in the last game of the match. And that was very impressive to me. I think he may be on the cusp of it now and ready to make his moves. So all of those guys I'm feeling very good about. Raonic I'm worried about.
Yeah. The one guy you didn't respond to, the name I threw out there was Nick Kyrgios, and I believe
Yeah, he's an enigma, isn't he? I mean,
right.
we all know that he has the whole package.
Yeah.
And yet we saw another questionable competitive effort over there against Seppi in Australia in a night match. And there are times when you feel like he just doesn't care enough, or where he just sort of loses his competitive will. And he needs somebody to get a hold of him, the right coach that's going to really make him bear down hard and hopefully not waste this wealth of talent that he has. And he's got such a beautiful serve, and he's a strong guy. He's capable of hitting winners off both sides. He can do it all. And but I don't put him in the camp with the other guys because I don't know if he's going to apply himself the way the others do week in and week out. Maybe Kyrgios will explode in one of these fortnights and just put it all together. But I believe he has to do a little better throughout the year on the ATP World Tour to sort of set the stage for that. And this year will be very telling. But I didn't like the way it started with that match with Seppi.
No, certainly not a good start. I root really hard for Nick Kyrgios, and I think he's great for tennis. And a lot of people would argue with me. But when I say the name Nick Kyrgios, when it comes to the sport and the attention that he brings to the sport, do you look at that as more of a negative thing or a positive thing with some of his antics, so to speak?
It's very much a mixed bag. I'm glad to hear that you're enthused about him. I am too. And I find myself rooting for him to sort of cast his demons aside. And we're going to find out over the next couple of years. And you have this great Australian heritage, so many guys that he could turn to, John Newcomb or Rod Laver or Ken Rosler, people that would give him the right kind of advice. I know there are prominent coaches that would be thrilled to work with him if they knew he was ready to make the full commitment. But I think when things are right with him, he's one of the most dynamic, exhilarating players out there, and I'd like to see him start to produce the kind of results that we know he's capable of.
Yeah, and then lastly, you got the Americans. You got Rubin, Francis Tiafoe, Taylor Fritz, this Riley Opelka. I do believe I'm feeling a little bit brighter about American men's tennis. Of course, the women have done great, but I'm feeling a little bit brighter about American men's tennis than I have in the past.
You should. The crop that you just mentioned are all impressive. Opelka was great over in Australia, pushed Goffin to his limits, and I think that Fritz hopefully will get going again. He just lost a challenger final to Ryan Harrison, who, by the way, is still only 24 years old and now back up to 62 in the world. So don't leave him out of that group.
Yeah.
I think I think a lot of these guys are going to really do some impressive things in the next couple of years, and it's the most encouraging phase for American tennis that I've seen in a long, long time.
Right, and then of course I do feel bad. I'm not going to lie. I just realized that I'm getting ready to let you go here. This has been awesome as always, and I didn't mention Serena, and I mean I don't know. It's There's not much to say. She's just awesome. I want to ask you this. In your book, The Greatest Tennis Matches of All Time, you do not have Serena Williams ranked as the #1 female. Now, that was published in, when was it? Was it 2014?
2012.
2012.
Yeah, that's a long
okay.
time ago.
Right. So what has changed
since
then?
23. This is her 23rd. I still want the career to play out to the end before I'm going to make the final decision there. She's climbed way up there for sure. And she's, the two that I had at the top were Graf and Navratilova. I had Graf at 1, Navratilova at 2, Chrissy Everett at 3. And Serena is closing in on all of them for sure. They all had longer periods of consistency, but if Serena can tie or break Margaret Court, which I now think she's going to do, she's made quite a case for herself. So I want to wait and see how she concludes her career. How many majors does she end up with? Can she get back and finish this year at #1? There'll be a number of factors that could determine it, but I think what she's done in her 30s is so much to her credit after wasted years in her 20s and reasons why she wasn't performing at peak efficiency. But what she's doing now and the joy she takes in the court craft, which she did again over there, that's what I like the best. She's really, there's now a court awareness that was never there in the past. She knows what she's doing point in and point out. There's a real strategic know-how. In the past, I thought she relied too much on just athleticism and instinct. Now, thanks to her coach, Patrick Mouratoglou, she's really playing very sound strategic tennis, and she didn't lose a set in this tournament, and it was a joy to watch her.
Yeah, it certainly was. Of course, I'm glad that it was such an awesome tournament that you got to witness, and I've had an awesome time the last 30 minutes talking about it.
Well, I look forward
Always
to doing
a
it
pleasure.
again sometime. It was good fun talking with you about the game, and you know the game well, and it
Thank
shows
you.
with your questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, we'll certainly do it again. It's been too long.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. That was Steve Flink, writer for TennisChannel.com.